Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got a really interesting combination out here to try. It's one that I legitimately don't know what we're going to see out of. It could work out fantastic, it could be terrible, it could be just mediocre. I really don't know what we're going to see today, but I'm definitely excited to try it because there's a potential it could be pretty impressive. So as for the shells I brought out here today, I got out some of the Hornady SST slugs, but these ones are the 20 gauge 250 grain SST slugs. As you can see, there's the sticker kind of wraps under the box, and they claim to be moving about 1800 feet per second. And we have tried the 12 gauge SSTs in the past with mediocre results really, but what can the 20 gauge SSTs actually do? And are they going to work through today's setup? That is the really big question that I have. And as for that setup I brought out here today, I got out my Stevens 301 20 gauge. It's got a 26-inch barrel with a Nikon inline XR on top. Yes, technically this is a muzzleloader scope, but it's what I have on there for testing purposes, and it will work just fine for today. But this is a smoothbore, and the SSTs are a Sabo slug, and if we shoot those just through a smoothbore, they are not going to properly stabilize. So that is where this guy comes in. This is a Carlson's rifled choke tube, and it says right here on the back that they can be used with rifled slugs or Sabo slugs. So is a rifle choke enough to stabilize a Sabo slug like that? I don't know. Especially since you see how short these little 20 gauge wind chokes are? That's 2.5 inches worth of rifling. Is that going to be enough to properly stabilize these? It might not. I have no idea. So today is kind of a roll of the dice. Number one, is a rifled choke tube enough to properly stabilize a Sabo slug? That's question number one. Question number two, if they properly stabilize, how good are the 20 gauge SSTs? Since I've seen some pretty mediocre results with the 12 gauge SSTs in the past. And number three, is a very short 2.25 inch long rifle choke enough rifling to properly stabilize a Sabo slug? I have no idea what we're going to see here. It could be fantastic, it could be terrible, but we don't know what's going to happen unless we try it. So for today's test, I don't have a ton of these slugs, so we're going to shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and a 3-shot group at 100, assuming that the 50-yard group is stable and accurate, but we'll just have to see what happens. All of those will be through the chronograph as well. It's not a perfect test, but at least we should have somewhat of an idea of if this combination is going to work at all. And yes, before I forget, the SST box does say for rifled barrels on it, but yet again, this is a test, and I just want to see what happens when we try this combination out. So enough talking, let's get you guys set up with a view of the 50-yard target. We'll shoot our 3-shot group and see what happens. If it looks decent, then we'll move it out to 100. If not, we may have to change some things up a little bit, but let's go take our shots and see if the 20 gauge SSTs will work through a smoothbore 301 with a rifled choke tube. Alright, so let's run through our velocities real quick before we look at our actual targets, where I called a little bit of an audible here. But the box claim was 1800. We have a 26-inch barrel with probably about half or maybe 3/4 of an inch of choke sticking out of the end of it. And I do believe we saw that box claim out of that barrel. So our high was 1864. Our low was 1766. That gave us an average of 1834 feet per second. And of course, here's all your energy numbers and stuff for a 250 grain SST slug at 1834 feet per second from the muzzle. Definitely not too bad there for velocity, considering their 1800 claim, that's for sure. That gave us an extreme spread of 98 and a standard deviation of 35. So overall, not looking too bad for velocity. I'll take that all day long. That is if they're actually flying stable and accurate enough where I would want to hunt with them. So let's move over to our target and see what actually was going on here. All right, so let's take a peek at our target because things did get pretty interesting here. Now, yes, I did decide to take two groups at 50 yards instead of one at 50 and one at 100. That's because we definitely saw some very sideways keyholing here. I mean, you can straight up see the bullet shape, especially up here with these top couple. They're just straight up sideways bullets. So that definitely answers the question. That 2¼ inches worth of rifling in that rifle choke is not enough to stabilize the Hornady SST slug. Is it enough to stabilize a slower moving or a little bit lighter weight Sabo slug? Potentially, but it kind of follows the same principle as you would in a rifle. If you have a really slow twist rate and a short barrel, you're not going to stabilize a big heavy bullet very well. Even though 250 grains is not super heavy for a 20 gauge by any means, but it's just not enough rifling right at the end of the barrel to get it done out of this particular setup anyway. But for what it's worth, at 50 yards, even though all of our bullet holes were sideways, they still didn't group all that terribly. Even the ones over here in our second group, we had that one bullet hole there, and the other two are pretty much in the same hole right on the very top of the target up here. So, I mean, I'll measure both of them and give you guys the numbers, even though I wouldn't hunt with them because they're flying sideways, but we should at least see what they gave us. So our first group on the left gave us 2.65 inches, and our second group on the right gave us 4.06. So a little bit worse. So pretty much here, I think it answered most of our questions for today. It's just not enough rifling to stabilize it, which definitely does make sense. It doesn't surprise me, but I was curious to see what would happen, and I think I got my answer. So this is just another example of why I like to test a little bit of everything, even though you might not initially think it'll work. Because sometimes they work out great, other times they're absolutely terrible. All right, here's one of the Sabos I found. They all pretty much look the same, and they all flew about 40 yards downrange or so. You can see there is the slightest little bit of rifle engagement right down here at the bottom third of these Sabos. So we did engage it, but it's just not enough to properly stabilize them. If we had about double the length of choke, or maybe a little bit faster of a twist rate, we might have stood a chance, but it's just not quite enough. The Sabos themselves, though, held up perfectly fine. Definitely nothing too special to see on them. And I did find a couple of these little green rubber pieces. I believe they sat down in the bottom of the Sabo like that, judging by the hole in the middle, and there's a little pin in the middle there as well. So I believe that's probably how it was set up. Definitely pretty interesting, because I don't think I've seen that in any Sabo slug before. And here's one of the little gas check pieces that sat underneath the Sabo. You can clearly see the lines from where it grabbed the rifling in there, but it didn't really put deep grooves into it like a rifled barrel would. So we definitely had engagement, just not enough at the end of the day. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that test right there? Even though we didn't see the results that I was kind of hoping to see, at least now we have an answer that a 2¼ inch long, 20 gauge rifle choke is not enough to stabilize at least a Hornady SST slug. Maybe with a little bit lighter weight slug, or at least a slower moving Sabo slug, it might work with them. But I also want to try it with a regular old lead rifled slug as well, because it might improve their accuracy enough to be worth it. And I, of course, still want to try another Sabo slug or two just to see what happens. We're probably going to see the same results, but you never know until you try it. So I guess leave your thoughts in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any Sabo slugs through a rifled choke? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? And is there a specific Sabo slug that you know works out well, or that you want to see us try through that particular choke to see if it works? Let me know all that down below. But at least now we have some answers to the questions that we came into this with, because I didn't know what we were going to see coming into it. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.